Hey everybody, welcome to Assignment 3 in Unit 5, Global Commerce. Tonight we'll be looking at reading pages 679 through 680 and looking at questions numbers 13 through 20. And if it seems like a lot, also seemed like a lot, oh, they ruined it for me here. This car loses its tire and there's no way that it's going to make it all the way to the end, right? Now you're cheering for it, right? Cheering, go, go. And that's right, you too can be a tire on a pile if you overcome. Moving forward with definitions, we're looking at fragmented, which means to break into pieces on page 679. And this is someone who is getting ready to fragment this wonderful solar system here with the sun in the center, and didn't work out for him either. Break into pieces. Plunder, which means to steal goods. And that's exactly what's going on here at South Park. Please notice there's signs where it says peace now. And last one is detained, which means to hold somebody back. And yes, I would say this person has figured out a way to detain this gentleman in the red Adidas jacket. Not sure what he did or if it even works, so don't try it at home. All right, that's everything, and we'll catch you back here for some question support, starting on page number 679 with the East India Companies. Far more important than the Spanish as European competitors for the spice trade were the Dutch and English, both of whom entered Indian Ocean commerce in the early 17th century. Together they quickly overtook and displaced the Portuguese, often by force, even as they competed vigorously with each other as well. These rising northern European powers were both militarily and economically stronger than the Portuguese. For example, during the 16th century, the Dutch had become a highly commercialized and urbanized society, and their business skills and maritime shipping operations were the envy of Europe. Around 1600, both the British and the Dutch, unlike the Portuguese, organized their Indian Ocean ventures through private trading companies, which were able to raise money and share risks among a substantial number of merchant investors. The British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company received charters from their respective governments granting them trading monopolies and the power to make war and to govern conquered peoples. Thus, they established their own parallel and competing trading post empires, with the Dutch focused on the islands of Indonesia and the English on India. Somewhat later, a French company also established settlements in the Indian Ocean basin. So, let's take a look. Question number 13. Why were the Dutch the envy of Europe during the 1500s? Stop and think. And respond. Yeah, that's right. The Dutch, which we would know as Germany now, if you've ever heard Deutschland before, that refers to Germany or Germany area. They were a highly commercialized area, and they were known for their business skills and shipping over the oceans. And the second one in here was number 14. How did the British and Dutch organize Indian Ocean ventures, and what did they receive? Stop and think. And respond. Yeah, that's right. They're able to expand through private trading companies. They raised money and became investors. And then what did they receive? Well, they received charters from their governments that allowed them to create monopolies and make war against people. Moving on, bottom of page 679. Operating in a region of fragmented, and highlight that word, fragmented, and weak political authority, the Dutch acted to control not only the shipping, but also the production of cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, and mace. With much bloodshed, the Dutch seized control of a number of small spice-producing islands, forcing their people to sell only to the Dutch and destroying the crops of those who refused. On the Banda Islands, famous for their nutmeg, the Dutch killed or enslaved or left to starve virtually the entire population of some 15,000 people, and then replaced them with Dutch planters using a slave labor force to produce the nutmeg crop. For a time in the 17th century, the Dutch were able to monopolize the trading in nutmeg, mace, and cloves, and to sell these spices in Europe and India at 14 to 17 times the price they paid in Indonesia. While Dutch profits soared, the local economy of the Spice Island was shattered and their people were impoverished. Okay, question number 15. How did the Dutch interact with the peoples of the Banda Islands? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, their interaction with those people was either killing them, enslaving them, or leaving them to starve. And we're looking at 15,000 people that were interacted with. Moving on, page 680. The British East India Company operated differently than its Dutch counterpart. Less well-financed and less commercially sophisticated, the British were largely excluded from the rich Spice Islands by the Dutch monopoly. Thus they fell back on India, where they established 3 major trading settlements during the 17th century. Bombay, on India's west coast, and Calcutta and Madras on the east coast. Although British naval forces soon gained control of the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf, largely replacing the Portuguese, on land they were no match for the powerful Mughal Empire, which ruled most of the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, the British were unable to practice trade by warfare, as the Dutch did in Indonesia. Rather, they secured their trading bases with the permission of the Mughal authorities or local rulers with substantial payments and bribes as the price of admission to the Indian market. When some independent English traders plundered, and highlight that word plundered, a Mughal ship in 1636, local authorities detained, and highlight that word detained, British East India Company officials for 2 months and forced them to pay a whopping fine. Although pepper and other spices remained important in British trade, British merchants came to focus much more heavily on Indian cotton textiles, which were becoming widely popular in England and its American colonies. Hundreds of villages in the interior of southern India became specialized producers for this British market. Okay, question 16. How did the British East India Company operate differently than the Dutch? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's right. They didn't have as much money, and they weren't commercially as smart, and they were excluded from the spice trades that the Dutch had a monopoly on. Next question, number 17. Why was the British East India Company unable to practice the trade by warfare in India? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's right. This is a short answer, is because the Mughal Empire was there and they were more powerful, so they couldn't do as the Dutch had done in Indonesia. Moving on. Next slide. Question 18. What happened when British East India Company traders plundered the Mughal ship in 1636? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's right. The local authorities got a hold of them and held them captive for 2 months and forced them to pay a large fine. And question 19. What did the British East India Company focus more heavily on in India, and why did they do that? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, exactly right. It was cotton textiles from India, and the reason they did was because they were very popular in England and the new American colonies. All right, continuing on, last paragraph. Like the Portuguese before them, both the Dutch and English became heavily involved in trade within Asia. The profits from this carrying trade enabled them to purchase Asian goods without paying for them in gold or silver from Europe. Dutch and English traders also began to deal in bulk goods for a mass market, things like pepper, textiles, and later tea and coffee, rather than just luxury goods for an elite market. In the second half of the 18th century, both the Dutch and British trading post empires slowly evolved into a more conventional form of colonial domination, in which the British came to rule India and the Dutch controlled Indonesia. Okay, last question, and coincidentally was the last thing I read, so you should probably know this already. What did the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company slowly evolve into? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's right. It was turning into colonial domination, meaning people were coming in and taking over the people that were there first, the peoples who were there first. They were just coming in and taking over, much like in the American colonies. So that's all for tonight, kiddos. Good luck on this, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.